In body horror, even though we've come to expect lots of chopping, slicing, and gouging, sometimes we get hit with something we don't expect. Something really weird that absolutely takes us off guard. If there was a Venn diagram of bizarre and surprising, then these deaths would fall solidly in the middle. So I'm Amy from What Culture, and here are 10 bizarre body horror deaths that came out of nowhere. 10. Suspiria, the mirror scene. People were so shocked by Suspiria's mirror scene that when the remake came out in 2018, there were whole articles dedicated to the film's most horrifying scene. In the scene, protagonist Susie dances for her school's matrons. Her form of modern dance includes sharp movements and quick, precise spins. It's quite violent looking in itself. Next door, however, even more violence is occurring. A fellow student, Olga, has found herself trapped in the room after accusing the matrons of witchcraft and then trying to leave the school. With each of Susie's movements, Olga is viciously attacked by an unseen force. She's thrown around, has her limbs bent at obscene angles, and her ribs protrude from her chest grotesquely. By the end of Susie's dance, Olga is dead, and quite spectacularly so. Her body is crumpled and folded, her face purple-tinted grey with her veins bulging. Not only was her death unexpected in timing, but definitely in method. It's pretty reasonable to predict injury whilst at dance school, but not like this. 9. The Final Destination. Diced by a fence. It is exactly the point of the Final Destination movies to take you by surprise with a left-field method of killing, and this one was certainly creative. After just narrowly escaping being crushed against a fence by a truck, Andy looks relieved. He tells the worried group that it's just not his turn to die. Just as he does, however, the cord that just saved him from the van gives way, with its spool being pulled loose and flying through the air. It knocks a gas canister. The canister hits Andy directly in the chest, launching him backwards to the very fence he just escaped death by and causing it to mince him up. 8. Martyrs. Lucy's death. Although it wasn't necessarily out of place for Lucy's death to be horrible, given that the whole movie is disgusting, it surely isn't controversial to say that her death sort of came out of nowhere. We were expecting her to be around for longer, if not for the whole movie, and so when out of nowhere she slashes her own throat, it took us by surprise. Also, her death was so quick that it was weirdly off-tone for the rest of the movie. It's not as straight up gross as some other entries further on in this list, but the sight of Lucy's head falling back and pulling open the wound on her neck as it gushes with blood is far from being a tame sight. She lies bleeding in the rain with red pouring from her neck, traumatizing further her already devastated companion Anna. What she didn't realize at the time of killing herself is that she was almost saving herself from a whole lot more trauma that Anna then becomes subject to. 7. Street trash. The first victim. Arguably the first victim of the Tenafly Viper is the best of them all, if not for the fact that he melts into a toilet, which is objectively hilarious, then because it's the first time we get to see what this vicious licker does. Now, I don't need to explain to you why this death is both bizarre and came out of nowhere. A man melting into a rainbow of colours with his flesh and bone dissolving, and the rest of him falling into a toilet bowl is pretty self-explanatory as to why it's weird. Anyone who has no familiarity with the film is sure to be absolutely taken aback by this scene should you show it to them, and that is for good reason. Look at it. Just look at it. 6. Freaky. The tennis court killing. This one I just had to include because I find it hilarious personally. I can't help but look at it and think of those really bad Halloween headpieces you get where it makes it look like you've got an arrow through the skull. The opening to 2020's Freaky shows a bunch of teenagers being murdered at a mansion, and the best of these deaths occurs out on the tennis courts. As a boy and girl wander across the darkened courts, the lights suddenly come on and reveal the butcher stood behind them. Out of nowhere, he produces a tennis racket, making me wonder if it was left out carelessly on the court or if he just brought it with him for the bit. He promptly snaps it over his knee and uses the jagged edges of the two pieces to pierce the boy's head through each temple. As far as body horror goes, it's quite cringe-inducing to see any kind of sharp objects pierce through the soft part of someone's head, but I will admit it's not the most horrific on this list. Just accept it for what it is, a perfectly comical surprise killing. 5. TETSUO Iron Man. The drill dick. Unfortunately, I'm not quite sure how much of this we're able to show you without upsetting the YouTube gods, so you may just have to take my word on this one. The death in question here occurs when a man's girlfriend kills herself by impaling herself on her boyfriend's penis, which has recently been transformed into a giant metal drill. The boyfriend's body is undergoing a series of changes in which his skin and appendages turn into metal, and after the transformation takes over his psyche, he's driven to attack his girlfriend. She defends herself by hitting him over the head and eventually having to stab him. him. At this point, she believes she's killed him, and overcome with guilt and grief, she then impales herself. The unfortunate thing, as if this whole situation isn't already unfortunate, is that he isn't dead after all, but now she is, and he's got his girlfriend's corpse skewered on his metal penis. Just imagine having to explain that to her family at the funeral. 4. ABCs of Death 2. D is for DELOUSED. The aesthetic of this stop-motion short is horrifying enough as it is without the additionally off-putting content it displays. Basically, a giant bug emerges from the floor and starts eating a man who's strapped to a table. From the man's bloody ear hole, a clone of him emerges. The clone opens up a hatch in the bug's rear end, from which a clown head stares at him and turns his arm into a blade. You with me so far? The man uses his blade arm to kill the guys who strapped his original body to the table and feeds their heads to the bug's hole. To finish this whole display, the clone gets his own head stuck in the bug's chamber, and in escaping he stretches his neck out obscenely. The headless corpses of his captors then decapitate the man's original body, feed it to the bug's bum, and in doing so, cause the clone's head to turn black and hard. Then they stamp his head in. Can you imagine that? After all that, they just stamp his head in. I know the ABCs of Death is meant to be weird, but this one really takes the cake as being just the most fucking weird thing I've ever seen. 3. Splinter. The Splinter Reanimation. Splinter is one of those films that actually makes me physically uncomfortable. Certain bits of the movie actually make me gag purely because of how thoroughly repellent they are. One of them is the death and reanimation of character Lacey fairly early on in the journey. Lacey is killed when she unwittingly releases the Splinter-infected gas station attendant, and her body is left outside as the others shut themselves in the station. As her boyfriend later attempts to drag her corpse into the building, the closing door cuts off her hand and we see the full horror of her death. That her body is being reanimated by the Splinter. Her severed hand is covered in the Splinter spikes and moves on its 3 fingers, and outside, her body begins to slam itself against the glass as her boyfriend watches on in horror. I don't know about you, but I definitely didn't expect a severed hand to be one of the creepiest bits of the movie, and her reanimated body was definitely enough of a shock to jump scare some people. 2. SLAXX, the debut of the killer genes. You know things are going to get freaky when you start watching a film about haunted genes. And the very first kill of the movie delivers. The first victim of the devious denim is a storefront worker who dons the jeans early, despite being told to leave the stock alone. I would say she learned her lesson, but given that she died, it doesn't really matter because she wouldn't remember. Feeling uncomfortable in the jeans, she heads to the toilet, but on trying to unzip them, she finds that they're stuck. Simultaneously, the waistband of the trousers begins to contract, becoming painfully unyielding against her body. We see her legs flail, her face contorting in pain as the fabric pulls through her waist like it was a cheese wire and she was a simple block of Stilton. Later, we see that the jeans have neatly arranged her body parts in a cupboard for her colleagues to find, and I can't quite decide if that's courteous or not. In a way, I guess it saved them from some cleaning up. 1. The Mortuary Collection. A penis explosion. As horrific as the title of this entry is, the reality of the scene is actually much worse. The penis in question doesn't just randomly explode, nor is it hooked to some kind of explosive device. No. That would be far too simple. Instead, what happens is frat boy Jake falls pregnant after stealthing during a one-night stand. Yes, he gets pregnant, just suspend your disbelief for a bit. His stomach begins to grow and the baby inside writhes around. Seeing him yelling in pain as the thing dances around inside him, the strain bringing his veins bulging under the surface of his skin is already grim enough. And that's not even mentioning the horrible, goopy moment when his water breaks. His death finally comes as he asks how the baby's going to come out, a very valid question given his anatomy. And at this point he's told that it'll come out the way it went in. And just like that, it's time to pop the sprog out, ripping open his stomach, pelvis, and penis in the process. Just imagine that. Imagine it. I dare you. And on that delightful note, we've reached the end of this list of 10 bizarre body horror deaths that came out of nowhere. Which one of these deaths would you least like to be yours? I'm gonna guess it's the penis explosion, but let us know in the comments down below if I'm wrong. And in the meantime, remember to check out whatculture.com for more lists and articles like this every single day. As always, I've been Amy from What Culture, and I'll catch you next time.